Morning, everybody. How are we doing today? It's chilly, foggy, wet morning here. It's a Sunday morning. A lot of moving pieces lately. Things have been kind of crazy. Happy holidays, everybody. Hope everyone's doing well. We're approaching the middle of December. Boy, this year flew by quickly. And I swear half the year was spent in the political fray, dealing with the onset of the election and the fallout of that election. And I don't want to get too deep into politics, but I'm going to for a minute here. It's just discouraging seeing the rise of nationalism in a time and a place where nationalism is now an outdated mode of thinking. The world's power structures aren't nations. Corporations are a far bigger, more powerful entity that dictate policy to nations, infiltrate nations, topple nations. Nations are a 20th century construct, and their efficacy has been left behind. And to try to put that worm back in the can, it just seems like a lot of effort for naught. And economically, I don't think it can be done. Most economists feel pretty much the same way from what I've been watching and reading. The tariffs, the isolationism, it's all going to be detrimental for the poorest and drive expenses and inflation. And it's something that a lot of people don't want to even talk about or face. I mean, it's interesting how people who voted for this don't want to discuss it and are very much in denial still, it seems like. But I've said it before, but I'm going to share it again briefly. To allow a nation to define you is the ultimate badge in propaganda. To allow that to be the label on your can that you think defines you, it makes you a product. And I've said before, a lot of Americans have become more American than human. That's a product of nationalism and propaganda. If you have a wall of canned tomatoes, all different brands and varieties of labels, but they're just tomatoes, and a couple of cans are saying, we're not tomatoes, we're Del Monte, that's a dumb tomato. Because you peel the labels off all those cans, what are you left with? Tomatoes. Human earthling is what defines you. And if you think you're an American before you're a human earthling, you have become a product. You have been manipulated and propagated and are being used as a tool by the ruling elite to keep you powerless and doing a disservice to your own interest. That's how it's always played out throughout history, and if you think it's different now, your level of denial is inescapably foolish. It's really a sad thing to see people in this day and age with access to world travel and the advent of history unfolding in the pages around us, the internet giving us access to all information, the satellite photos from space of our little blue planet, the fact that they can still pull the wool over our eyes so efficiently, and to wring more out of the poor, the middle classes, for the rich to keep growing their wealth. We should just be ashamed of ourselves. And it's out of this tyranny and out of this greed that jazz was born. It's out of this kind of tyranny and oppression that the Bible was born. Oppression leads to art about freedom. It just does. The winners of the great wars write the history books. The losers of these wars get to make great art. And all these nationalists who think that they have some kind of club that they're a member of and they should exclude others from it, you're not in the club. I'm just sorry, you're not. Their interests are not your interests. And you're going to find out the hard way, sadly. But it's tough to not have to think and feel a lot of this stuff because it surrounds me. The ideologies of the people I'm around. I tried to bring up tariffs to someone the other day, and they just turned around and walked away. Like if you're just gonna talk shit about Trump, we didn't even talk. All we mentioned was one of his policies, but he had no time to comprehend, understand, debate, or even discuss. It was literally a 15-second exchange, and the guy turned around and walked away. And if your belief systems are that fragile, and what you think you understand is that frail that you can't sit and have a conversation about it, there was no name calling. There was no insulting. There was no... It was simply, you think these tariffs are why you're not getting your Christmas bonus kind of a question? Because your company had to buy more product to make up for the possible rise of the costs? Which I've read and heard from many sources, that's a real thing. Zero patience for it. And it's just alarming. I've been DJing again, and now in Rochester instead of the Twin Cities. And the response has been really positive. People are really loving it. It's helping, but I'm making a fraction of what I made in Minneapolis, obviously, because I'm just kind of a new entity here. But we're surviving. Still could use donations to the channel in any way possible. Patreon, YouTube, please hit the subscribe button, please hit the like button. All the stuff you're supposed to do if you're a YouTuber, please do that stuff. I mean, it's part of the deal, I guess, but anyway, let's talk about jazz. I've been really enjoying being back in a public venue playing music for people, and I play music from 7 decades, from kind of current stuff all the way back to the 50s, the beginnings of rhythm and blues, rock and roll, jazz, the blues, and everything in between. Funk, soul, 80s pop, 80s rock. I mean, it's just, there's a little classic rock, 50s rock. I mean, there's all the stuff, it's all interwoven. And it's fun to go from Adele to Billie Holiday, from Amy Winehouse to Mary Wells and Motown. Everything is so interwoven. And it's fun to connect those dots for people whose listening habits are often very niche. And to kind of get the young people to recognize where their music is coming from, the old people to recognize there's still music today that's very much in those frame of mind references. And there's not a lot of music that really exists outside of the Black American influence on music. It's just, there's really very little. Everything is so driven by the groove and the patterns of rhythm and blues, which became rock and roll. And it's really inescapable. All that 80s new wave, all that 80s Brit stuff. I mean, it's all just, all the yacht rock stuff. It's all just light rhythm and blues. All of it. It's inescapable. From Cyndi Lauper to Madonna, from Britney Spears to Christina Aguilera, everything is so rooted in the patterns and grooves of black music. It's inescapable. And it's fun connecting those dots for people. I'm playing a pretty wide swath of stuff for, like I said, 7 decades. And it's nice to be able to put jazz into a context for people to appreciate it. And for people to be, oh, I really like this. What is that? Oh, that's Grant Green. Oh, that's Joe Pass. Oh, I like that. That's really good. So that's been a lot of fun. And I'm also diving into a lot of like the fun stuff from the 50s, the Peggy Lee stuff, Nancy Sinatra stuff, Rat Pack stuff. I mean, just fun stuff that people often aren't going to be too familiar with. Mel Torme. I love playing some Mel Torme for people. Put on the Ritz. I mean, people just are like, they love it. Often don't know who it is. Like, I love the song. Who is this? You know, that's really fun. And of course, that leads me to my first record I'm going to show you, Henry Mancini, who is one of the great staples of the pop lexicon of the 50s and 60s. And I think for so many Westerners, his grafting of jazz into the classical arena, in the orchestral setting of the Hollywood studios, the way he grafts jazz into that ensemble was revelatory. How does that sound? And really familiarizes many people with the language, so that when they actually dive deeper into jazz, it's already something they know a lot of the terminology. And of course, the Pink Panther is one of the great examples of that. The Pink Panther is one of the funnest dark blues jazz with elements of even free. I mean, there's some avant-garde elements in that song. It's a really creative piece. But going back even further than the Pink Panthers, of course, the Peter Gunn soundtrack, which was a television show that ran like 57 to 60, I believe it was. I think it was ABC. A fun show about a detective, private investigator. I believe it was in Los Angeles. And NBC, sorry. And Mancini, I'd already done a few soundtracks before this, but this was one of the things that really put him on the map. And only 34, he already written stuff for the Orson Welles Touch of Evil, the Benny Goodman story, the Glenn Miller story, which he actually won nominated for an Academy Award. Touch of Evil soundtrack, that's some cool stuff, by the way. Orson Welles. His lineage with RCA, Record Company of America, who had a lot of influence on a lot of the film industry. He really ends up being on a lot of, from Baby Elephant Walk to Illusion to Moon River, The Experiment in Terror. These are all fantastic songs that graft elements of jazz, some more than others. So Moon River is kind of just a pop piece, but I mean, Experiment in Terror is one of the funnest little hints of rockabilly, rock-a-hellbilly, just fun, and dangerous, and spooky. If you listen to like Budo's band from today, Experiment in Terror is like a predecessor to all that. So Mancini is really a chameleon that uses a lot of different sounds and instruments to produce color and mood. And in that way, he's really got a lot in common with Duke Ellington. Ellington was the master of creating pastiche, creating feeling with sound, creating color with sound, creating mood with sound, putting you in the emotional state that he wanted you to feel. And Mancini really borrows from that. And if you think about the third stream of the modern jazz quartet and all the cool jazz and even the birth of the cool, I mean, a lot of that grafting of classical Western tradition into the jazz black sound of America was kind of this whole crossover thing that's happening. And Mancini's kind of, I don't say at the forefront, but he's certainly one of the main progenitors and people who delivers this sound to white America in the suburbs and cul-de-sacs and backwoods. I mean, for a lot of people, Pink Panther and Peter Gunn is how they first really came across jazz, saxophone, and that noir sound. So Mancini is definitely a very important person. And not all of his stuff's going to be as jazzy, but some of it's very bluesy, some of it's very jazzy. But the Peter Gunn soundtrack, he ends up working with some of the guys from Woody Herman's band. And, I mean, standout talent. Ted Nash, Dick Nash, Pete Condoli, the great piano player John Williams, who ends up becoming one of the great film score arrangers, conductors of the 80s and the 90s. I mean, in the TV show itself, jazzmen would often appear as jazzmen in the jazz club that Peter Gunn liked to go hang out with his darling. Was it Lois? What was her name? Oh, what's her name here? But he would go see his girl who was a singer, a jazz singer in a club. And Shelly Manne was in a couple episodes. Shorty Rogers was performing in one of the clubs at one point. Lorindo Almeida, the great Brazilian bossa nova guitar player, he shows up early before the bossa nova, even in an episode. And so it's really a great hybrid that presents jazz to people in a real subliminal way, but in a very fresh and all-encompassing way. Because like I said, there's some stuff that really pushes the boundaries of what the cool and even some of the avant-garde stuff, like some of the swells in Pink Panther. Charlie Mingus will be proud of that. So it's a really cool open door for a lot of people to walk through into understanding first the white jazz, and then of course the roots of it, which was always the black jazz players. And I fell in love with Mancini 20 some years ago. I have most of his work on RCA. It's really great stuff. Great composing, great arranging. great musicianship behind all of it, and all of it sets a mood. One of my favorite songs on this planet is when you hear Johnny Hartman on I Just Dropped By to Say Hello record sing Charade. And Charade, of course, is from another film that Mancini wrote, and I don't think he wrote the lyric, but Charade's one of the great songs of the era. And hearing Johnny Hartman's baritone sing Charade, it's just a marvelous. It does make the original seem a little saccharine once you hear Hartman do it with that fantastic band on that Impulse record. But I mean, it's really noteworthy stuff. You really got to dig into Henry Mancini. I've loved, like I said, the Blues and the Beat record, which isn't a soundtrack. It's just him with his orchestra doing really fun. I mean, a lot of it could be Scooby-Doo stuff. I mean, it's just got this great feel to it. Batman theme sounding. I mean, the guy who did the Batman, Neil Hefti, obviously was a contemporary of Henry Mancini, but I think in a lot of ways he was an influence on Hefti. And Hefti has a strong pedigree of his own. I think he even worked with Basie for a while. I mean, Hefti has a strong pedigree all on his own. He does the Batman theme and a whole lot of other stuff as well. But Mancini was really a luminary, really a bright, well-respected and popular song composer. And his soundtrack sold well, which is partly why he continually got those movie jobs, because his name had a ring to it. And so he definitely was one of the biggest influences on the American listener. And a lot of us who are from my age, and I would say 20 years older and even 20 years younger, if you grew up watching reruns of old films on television at night, that music crept into your lexicon, it crept into your vocabulary. And he was really one of the great influencers of the American ear into hearing the varied sounds that exist within the world of rhythm and blues, the blues and jazz. Another fun record by a great guitar player named Mundell Lowe, and this also was on RCA on the Camden subsidiary. This is Mundell Lowe doing TV action jazz. And some of the stuff's going to be taken right from Mancini, who was his label mate. But Mundell Lowe actually has a very strong jazz pedigree. I think he was actually from Alabama or Mississippi, I think it was Alabama. But he played with Tony Scott, the great clarinetist. He played with a young Bill Evans at times in New Jersey. Mundell Lowe is a fantastic guitar player. His early 3 or 4 albums on Riverside from the late 50s are fantastic. Those are really great records that are hard to find, but they don't go for big bucks like some of the Riverside stuff can. I mean, you can find original pressings of those Riverside Mundell Lowe records from $20 to $80, which is a good deal for an old Riverside. Tony Scott's actually on this. The great Jimmy Cleveland's on this, one of the greatest baritonists of all, trombonists of all time. Eddie Costa, the fantastic pianist, is on this. Ed Chauncey, the drummer, and then a young Donald Byrd. I mean, Don Payne's also on this. Well, I can't tell you who that is, to be honest. He's probably trombone, clarinet, trumpet, piano, drums. Don Payne is probably the bass player, I would guess. But Peter Gunn, of course, they do that right off the bat. The Thin Man's a fun track. The M Squad, the Mod Squad, 77 Sunset Strip, The Naked City, which is one of my favorite television shows as well. Perry Mason, Mike Hammer. So it's fun television theme stuff as well. And when I'm DJing, it's fun to throw that stuff into the mix. And it's very much bridge material where you can bridge something very jazzy with something like that and then go into a blues or an R&B track. And it just feels like you just kind of segued very naturally. A couple more fun records we're going to look at real quick. The great Herb Geller was married to Lorraine Geller for a while. This is on the Dot label. I don't remember how long they were married, but they do a couple records together at MRC. And she gets this record as a solo player here at the piano, Lorraine Geller. And I can't remember if she's accompanied at all. It might just be solo piano. I think there's some backing on some of this if I remember. I listened to it last week. But, boy, she's a fantastic lyricist. Just a great piano player with a lot of groove and dexterity. And it's just a fun record to find. It's on the Dot label, which had some good stuff in the late 50s, early 60s on it. Not a legendary jazz label, but certainly a label that had some fun titles. Now this record really kind of just surprised me. I'm going to say it almost shook me. It's on the Crown label, which is a West Coast semi-budget label, and not a preeminent label in any way. I mean, you have your Pacific, you have your Contemporary, you have Fantasy out of the Bay Area. Crown was more of a budget thing. But in 57, 8, 9, there's some really good original material on that label. And the playing on this record is really insane. Clyde Dunn, John Ewing, Eddie Beale, Bill Douglas, William Green, Buddy Collette, Parr Jones. Not a lot of household names there. But Red Callender was a legendary bass player in a lot of the West Coast scene. And he actually played tuba at times early on before transitioning primarily to the bass. And Red was a fantastic player that can be found on a lot of West Coast sessions. And this is a very modern, composed, arranged. I mean, it's called Swingin' Sweet for a reason, because it does feel almost like an Ellington suite with its composition. It's not just them sitting down and blowing. It feels very much, and I guess Buddy Collette, of course, is one of the great arrangers of that time frame. So probably one of the best records I've heard on the Crown label, to the point where I probably listened to it for five times in a row, just because it was so enamoring and so interesting and complex and beautiful orchestration. Yet it all had a real driving blues and groove to it. Is modern octet. He's acknowledged one of the world's greatest bassists. A refreshing difference with the Callender organization is warm, rhythmic understanding with great imagination, emotion, and simplicity. His whole heart is wrapped up in his work, from ballads to blues, giving out a rich, decidedly different, personal, swinging sound. Each number of this album has been completely scored and well contemplated by Red. I mean, really, it's a fantastic. Red played with Dizzy at times, Charlie Shavers at times. He worked with so many greats, from Lester Young to Charlie Ventura, Red Norvo, Wardell Gray, Dexter Gordon, Vic Dickinson, Billie Holiday, Hazel Scott. I mean, just a real pedigree. And you get bass players like some of the guys that would get signed up with these smaller labels to make records as a leader, because they often weren't given leadership roles on the bigger labels. And so it allowed some of these smaller labels to get access to a great musician who had access to great talent around them. And so this is probably as much a Buddy Collette session in some ways as it is a Red Callender, but it really, really surprised me. It's really an outstanding record that is not the simple musings of a bass player just trying to make a paycheck. This has a lot of complexity and interesting arrangement. It's really beautiful. Another record I listen to quite a lot, Roy Haynes, the drummer, who I think just passed away, sadly. This is on the Pacific label, Pacific number 82, probably a 62 or 63. And it features strongly Frank Strozier, a great tenor player who was part of the West Coast scene. I think he might have played with Herman for a little bit. I can't remember exactly. But Strozier had, actually I think he came out of Memphis, if I remember. And worked with some of the Memphis guys like Phineas Newborn and Booker Little. But he was a fantastic player. And Mr. Lucky, a Mancini song, shows up on this, honestly. So nice little connection there. But Strozier's on this, along with Roy Haynes, Sam Dockery and Larry Ridley on the bass and the piano. And Sam Dockery was a jazz messenger for a brief moment in '56. Really a great session by some really kind of under the radar players. Again, I listened to this probably 4 or 5 times, and Strozier is really a revelation. He's really brilliant. And if I remember, he might even play the flute or the clarinet on a couple numbers on this. Really, really a strong record. And this will fetch decent money nowadays, which a lot of that Pacific stuff from the 60s goes for pretty easy money. But that one can kind of get you up there a little bit more. And lastly, I want to talk about Soul Station by Hank Mobley. One of my all-time favorite Blue Notes. Just a great driving hard bop with elements of cool and the blues kind of sprinkled in. It's pre-boogaloo, but that element's starting to creep in a little bit with some of the rhythm and blues aspects of this. Soul Station, just a wonderful number. The rhythm section on this with Wynton Kelly, Paul Chambers, and Art Blakey is top of the mark. And this is what Blue Note is. This is what Blue Note sounds like. It's driving, it's grooving, it's gospel. It's just a wonderful expression of a man's soul. And this is Mobley in one of his finest hours. He's in a real fine form here. Just the gentlest of spirit. And I think that's such an important thing to understand about these players, is they're kind of emoting based off who they are. And who they are, who their personality is, has a lot to do with how and what they express. I mean, that's one of the great factors, the brushstrokes of jazz, of any art really, is your personality. Because you're expressing your environment, you're expressing your experience within that environment, but then your personality will dictate how you handled that experience within that environment. So a guy with a gentle spirit, who's kind of calm and easygoing and reflective, might have a much calmer approach to chaos than a guy who's full of animosity and aggression and edge. And so Mobley always has this kind of relaxed, cool, we're going to get through this mentality that emanates through all this playing. And he's a bit of a chameleon. When he's with a more aggressive group, he can definitely push a more aggressive sound. But usually when he's in his own setting, it comes off more blues, more gospel, more casual, but very still sincere. He was called the middleweight champion of the tenor, which is of course a boxing reference. Didn't reference his importance or sound. It was more of his reflection of his gentleness, and he wasn't this aggressive player like a Rollins or a Coltrane. He was much more subdued and thoughtful. And I find that a very compelling recipe for me at times when I'm in my listening place to put him on and just to sense that melancholy and that beauty and that spirit. I love Mobley. He's one of my favorite players of all time. He really embodies the gentleness of the Black American with the congeniality of an Armstrong, of a Count Basie. Just, I know there's been a lot of ugly, a lot of hurt, a lot of tyranny, but I don't want to continue that pain and that hurt. I want to try to heal some of that. I want to try to make things more positive, better for all of us. And so, like Armstrong, there's a great sense of kind of forgiveness and let's move forward. Let's try to be positive and let's try to heal some of this hurt. And I guess that's kind of where we need to end this episode today. Well, let's try to heal some of this hurt. No one wants chaos. Nobody wants the downfall of the poor or the downtrodden or the sick or the homeless or the hungry. The rich, from all experience and all history, don't care about them. But we need to. And if we have any belief in morality or spirituality or heaven and hell, we are judged by how we treat those who are worse off than we are. That's what will be the measuring stick. Not our pious, not our sanctity, not our knowledge of Scripture, but how do we treat people? That's the ultimate reflection of who we are. And you can tell a lot about a man by their works and how they treat people and how they talk about people. And so regardless of your gender, regardless of your race, regardless of your nation, regardless of your religion, treat people well. I mean, it's not a cliche. Treat people well. Show respect. Show them dignity. And you'll be amazed how that extension of a hand, an olive branch, will come back most of the time with an olive branch in return. When you treat people with rudeness and indignity and judgment, you're going to get their worst back. And it's hard to build a bridge when both sides come in with pillars ablazing. So it's just time that we move forward, people, and learn some lessons from our history. And let's try to embrace each other with more positivity and love. I mean, I hate to get into that preachy mode, but it's just such an underlying message that is in my heart and my soul. Carl Sagan is one of my great influences in this life. And I think he'd be very disappointed to see where we are as a species and how we're dismissing science for dogma, how we're dismissing empathy for hate and fear. It's not progress. Regionalism and nationalism is an antiquated way of thinking in a global world, in a global economy. If we aren't as up to par as they are in their global viewpoints, we will be downtrodden and manipulated and fooled. We need to extend our empathy to all this creation, to all people on this planet, and care about their well-being, because what we allow others to suffer through will soon be brought upon us. So we can't tolerate evil against any group and not expect that evil to come and roost in our own backyards eventually. Love you all. Be safe. Be strong. Spread love. Spread positivity. I mean, let's hope for the best these next 4 years. No one wants to see the worst. I don't. I hope that good things happen. In spite of my skepticism, in spite of a lot of the economic experts, I'm hoping that there's positives that come out of this new administration and that there's progress to be made. Yes, I'm skeptical, but I'm also an optimist. I also want to believe that common sense will end up ruling the day. Please help support the channel in any way you can. Patreon, YouTube, thanks. PayPal's most appreciated because that's the most immediate payment. But please subscribe, like the channel, and spread love in the world, guys. You have a great day. Peace.